Okay, everybody, good afternoon. Happy Wednesday. Happy Tu B'Av. Today is a holiday on the Jewish calendar called Tu B'Av, a day when we don't say Tachanun. It's a happy day. It's the beginning of the high holiday season, Tu B'Av. The Rosh Hashanah is a month and a half away. And so now we start a very happy journey, a journey of tshuva and consolation, etc. And we are on page 387, continuing chapter 29. Chapter 29, for those who are paying attention, is a difficult chapter. We say people go through different chapters in their life. I'm going through a difficult chapter. This is a difficult chapter. Perek Chavtes is a tough one because the Alter Rebbe's prescription for how to cure a heart of stone, is not an easy prescription, and it's not a pleasant one. It's not sweet. It's very tough. It's very tough love, because essentially what the Alter Rebbe is prescribing, first of all, what the Alter Rebbe is diagnosing, is that a heart of stone is a symptom of arrogance, haughtiness. And the Alter Rebbe's prescription for how to cure this terrible case of contempt for what is good and holy is to humble yourself, to humble the spirit of the animal soul. In other words, to pretend as if something that is important is not important is a terrible symptom of arrogance, of conceit. It's only that kind of conceit that could cause a person to say, I know that everybody thinks this is very important, but I don't care. I don't care, which is exactly the problem here. I know, but I don't care. If you know that something is important, if your mind has already convinced you that something is very important, especially we're talking about God, it's more than important, it's all important. Your mind has already convinced you, and you're convinced. Intellectually is not the problem over here. Intellectually, you're there. You get it. It's just that your heart remains indifferent. In other words, I know and I don't care. So the Alter Rebbe says this is one of the really bad personality traits of the animal soul, that is not interested in elevating itself towards something that is greater than itself, or embracing something that is deeper than its own shallow pleasure seeking. So therefore, it just acts like it doesn't care. Hashem wants this, Hashem wants that. Other people need me, other people are depending on me, other people are feeling pain. I don't care. It's a heart of stone. And for a person who has a heart of stone as well as a indifferent mind, this is not a problem. He doesn't care. He doesn't know. He makes himself ignorant. And ignorance is bliss, and doesn't feel any kind of internal conflict, and he doesn't feel any frustration. But for a person who does know and does understand and gets it, and yet feels this kind of indifference, it's very difficult. So the Alter Rebbe says this is coming from conceit, and therefore you're going to have to go through a procedure called humbling. You got to eat some humble pie. The animal soul has to eat humble pie. And the Alter Rebbe then says one of the more difficult statements of this chapter, which is that you have to accept the fact that when you are feeling these kind of symptoms, it's obvious evidence that you are not a tzaddik, because a tzaddik doesn't have this particular kind of struggle. So you're not a tzaddik, and therefore, because you're not a tzaddik, the animal soul is your identity. So when we're talking about the animal soul's arrogance, we might as well come clean and say your arrogance. We talk about the animal soul's indifference. You can just be honest and say that a person can say, I am acting indifferent, and not make the mistake of thinking that this is just the animal soul. No, it's not just the animal soul. For a tzaddik can dismiss it and say, oh, this is just the animal soul. But for a Beinoni, or a person striving to be a Beinoni, you can't say just the animal soul, because the animal soul is the level upon which I function. So when the animal soul is arrogant, that's me being arrogant. And therefore, the humbling of the animal soul is going to be a humbling of me. I don't want that. I don't like it. It's not going to be pleasant. But the Alter Rebbe says that's what you got to do. And because we know who the Alter Rebbe was, and because we know the rest of Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe preaches that a person should keep themselves up and optimistic and thinking positive and thinking about Hashem and thinking about good things and healthy things and happy things, we know then that in this chapter, where the Alter Rebbe is prescribing such a very different, radically different prescription, which is to go down and to really beat yourself up about this arrogance, know that the Alter Rebbe is only prescribing this on condition that it is a means to an end. This is not a way of life. This is not a way of Judaism. This is a means towards discovering joy. Remember, the Alter Rebbe has been all along has been talking here about how to find joy in the face of obstacles, and one of the obstacles is the Tzimtzum Halev. One of the obstacles is the heart of stone, which depresses people that have it. The person that experiences a heart of stone gets upset about himself. So the Alter Rebbe is prescribing a means to find joy. So it's not a negative, embittered lifestyle. It's not a grim lifestyle, God forbid. It's a temporary deviation in order to find genuine happiness. One more point. The Alter Rebbe said this a shocking statement, really shocking, especially if you've learned Chassidus, it's very shocking, that for a Beinoni, the animal soul is the identity. That when I talk about myself, I went, I did, I think, I feel, I is the animal soul. Now, if you're a mensch, not a tzaddik, but if you are a mensch, you are identifying as the animal soul, but the intellect of the animal soul. In other words, if we can take a step back for a second, we know that the Alter Rebbe has taught us, and actually taught, this is basic Torah, that life is about making choices between good and bad. So when you make a choice between good and bad, between right and wrong, who is making this choice? When we talk about choosing between the advice, the advocacy of the godly soul and the advice of the animal soul, so who is making the choice? If the animal soul is one advisor and the godly soul is another advisor, then who is the person in the middle choosing between the two? Not the animal soul, not the godly soul. Who is it? And the answer is that the person, for a mensch, for a person who is a decent person, not a tzaddik, not a saint, but also not a scoundrel, a mensch. For such a person, the person making the choices identifies as the intelligence of the animal soul. If you were a tzaddik, you would identify as the godly soul. If you were, God forbid, a thoroughly bad person, a rotten person, then you would be functioning entirely with the emotions of the animal soul. In other words, totally instinctive, totally pleasure-seeking, and that's all. Then there is the person who is nishtahim, nishtaheh. He's not functioning as a godly soul, that's for sure. Otherwise, if he was functioning as a godly soul, he would never get hungry on Yom Kippur. He would never have any desire for anything that's not holy and godly. So we're not talking about such a person. And we're also not talking about a terrible person who is only functioning with self-interest and seeking pleasure. We're talking about a person in the middle. So that person is functioning with the animal soul, not yet the godly soul, the animal soul, but the intelligence of the animal soul. In other words, a person that operates with common sense, not divine wisdom. I can't say that I operate with divine wisdom, but I also don't want to say that I'm totally an animal, which is the emotions of the animal soul is basically an animal that functions only with survival instinct and seeking pleasure, and that's it. But that's not me, and that's not you. Most people that are striving to be a Beinoni, are functioning with the intelligence of the animal soul. So the Alter Rebbe is saying, since you function with the animal soul, since you identify as an animal soul, which means that since you generally identify as a self-interested person, you're high-minded, you have high aspirations, but meanwhile, they're only aspirations. Meanwhile, you operate as a selfish person. Even my spiritual aspirations are selfish. I want to be a better person. I want to become better. So it's self-interest. So that's the animal soul. So Alter Rebbe is saying you are basically your animal soul. So when you humble the animal soul, you'll be humbling you will be humbling yourself. Now, for those who have studied Chassidus or gone or been involved with Chabad for any length of time, you know that one of the basic beliefs of Chabad is that every Jew is holy. That regardless of how a person has been living their life and regardless of what kind of choices a person has been making, every Jew is holy. Every Yid is kadosh. Why? Because every Jew has a godly soul. But according to what the Alter Rebbe is saying here, wouldn't it be true? Couldn't you say that no, not every Jew is holy. Every Jew is given a godly soul, but if you choose to identify, or if you identify it with an animal soul, then you are an animal soul. And when you achieve a kind of greatness to where now you identify as the godly soul, then you will call yourself holy. But if Alter Rebbe says that the identity of a Beinoni is the animal soul, well, if that's his identity, then how is he holy? If that's the core of who he is right now, temporarily, then how can you say that he's holy? He's an animal soul. And of course, the answer is that what the Alter Rebbe is addressing here, the struggle that the Alter Rebbe is addressing here, is a conscious struggle. The Alter Rebbe is talking about feelings, sensitivities. This is all on the functional, conscious level of the person. On the functional and conscious level of the person, a Beinoni is not his godly soul. He doesn't always hear his godly soul. He doesn't always feel his godly soul. He doesn't always feel the way his godly soul feels. So on the conscious level, a Beinoni is his animal soul. When we say that everybody is holy, we mean on the subconscious level. That when you get to the core of the person, which of course is not going to necessarily drive the way they live their life, otherwise everybody would be a tzaddik. But beneath the surface, what is lurking beneath the surface of every person is that the godly soul, is that nefesh elokis, and therefore, when you're looking at another person, you have the luxury of saying, "Let me look past the superficial, and let me look past the surface, and let me look to the core, the very core, and that's the godly soul." And that is called looking favorably at another person. But when you're dealing with yourself, even though you gotta believe that at your core, you are a godly soul, just like anybody else. But that doesn't help to resolve this problem. In fact, this could exacerbate the problem. When a person says, "My heart is indifferent and my heart doesn't care, I have a heart of stone, but it doesn't matter because at my core, I'm good." No, that's not good. That is not called tackling the problem. That's called avoiding the problem. To say, "Yeah, but deep down I'm good." Of course, we know that deep down you're good, but we're not dealing with deep down right now. Right now, we're dealing with more surface issues: your thoughts, your words, and your behavior. So, if in your thoughts you cannot feel an emotional excitement from things that are important, that's what we're dealing with. To avoid the issue and say, "Yeah, but at the core of my being, I'm sacred and pure," is true, but right now it's not relevant. So this is important because, God forbid, a person should read chapter 29 and start to have doubts about their own value and their own worth. And am I really, if I don't identify as a godly soul, then am I really holy? Maybe I'm just basically an animal, and let that be what I am. It's fine. No, no, at your core, you're holy. But for that very reason, it has to be unacceptable to you that on your conscious level, you're not holy. And that's the whole journey. That's the whole struggle, to bring the holiness from your core up to a level that you can speak it and feel it and think it, do it. And that's what Alter Rebbe is addressing here. So this is an assurance, a reassurance that even if you go take the deep dive that the Alter Rebbe is prescribing here, and he certainly is prescribing a very intense deep dive, to the point, as we will continue to learn next week, to the point that a person would find themselves contemptible A person will if he follows Alter Rebbe's prescription, will eventually come to a realization, an awakening. I will come to a realization and an awakening that I hate myself. I hate the way I am. And a person could say, that's terrible. Why would you do that? Well, it's terrible if that is a way of life. It's not terrible if it's therapy. It's not terrible if you're putting yourself through therapy in order to become a mensch on the other side. If a person says, I feel that the way I am right now is not good enough, the Alter Rebbe says, not good enough. It's despicable. And until you embrace how bad it is, you will not react properly. You won't react with the proper urgency. Just like the God forbid, the health of the body. Person says to his friend, the doctor, "Yeah, I'm feeling very severe pains in the chest. It's discomfort." And the doctor says to him, "It's not discomfort. You're about to have a heart attack. You don't have the right urgency here." So, oh, doctor, don't think negative. It's not a matter of thinking negative. It's a matter of solving and curing this issue so that you can go on and live a positive thinking life. So the Alter Rebbe is saying the same thing. A chassid comes to the Alter Rebbe, and he says, no matter how hard I try with my mind, my heart remains indifferent, and it frustrates me. Alter Rebbe says, it frustrates you? That's all? You have a heart of stone and you're just frustrated? No. You have to really get upset. You have to really get angry. It's got to really bother you. You have to understand that this is critical. And then understanding and recognizing the depth of how serious it is, that itself is already half the cure, as we will continue to learn. So God forbid anybody should think that chapter 29 is a negative chapter or a grim chapter. It is not. It's difficult. It's a bitter pill, but it leads to great, great relief, very happy and very lofty results, as, with Hashem's help, we will learn next week. Seid alle gesund.